Welcome to this conversation on flourishing and education. I'm Sabre Cherkowski, and I'm so glad you are joining us. This space is about reimagining schools as places where teachers, leaders, and students flourish together, where we shift the conversation from burnout to belonging. This conversation and similar conversations that I'll be having with other researchers is a chance for us to reflect together, to ask questions that matter, and to share what we're learning along the way. Good morning. My name is Sabre Cherkowski. I'm a professor in the Okanagan School of Education, and we're located here in Kelowna on the unceded ancestral territory of the Syilx Okanagan people. And just a pleasure to be having a conversation today with a visiting doctoral student coming from Italy. So I will turn it over to you to introduce yourself.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me in this conversation. My name is Laura. I am a PhD student in pedagogical sciences at the University of Padua in Italy. So I'm from Italy, and I'm here for visiting international program students. And it's my first time abroad doing this kind of research under your supervision, and I'm very glad to be here, and I think it is really a grounding experience for me, a very inspiring experience. And that is why also I would like to say that our conversation is about echoes and flourishing, and it is really related to what I'm doing for my PhD, but it is really also contextual, because this conversation I think is about your echo, my echo, trying to resonate together. And so thank you very much for inviting me.
I love that. Do you want to talk a little bit more about what you mean when you say echoes?
Yeah, sure, thank you. So I would say echo is something very important to me, in my personal and professional life, but I probably would start from the definition. And so it is like a physical phenomenon. And it is something that starts from a point. For example, it can be a point of view, it can be a situation or a geographical space, and it can arrive everywhere, elsewhere, with different directions and multiple directions. And the interesting fact to me is that its meaning will stay. So the meaning will try to overcome different spaces and times, but it will gain different interpretations depending on, of course, the other points of view and the other perspectives. So I think it is important, and I think it is very connected to what happened when I first read your paper and when I first look at your research profile, because I was trying to do my literature review research, and I came into your paper. It was about leadership, it was about flourishing, and I really felt in that paper there was your echo. So I tried to grasp the meanings you try to make in your paper, but at the same time I tried to make my own interpretations depending on my, of course, focus and so on. So I think it's something very very shared. So it's about sharing, and it's about, of course, flourishing, because it is a process, it is a transformation that can touch different voices. So this is my meaning of echo, and I really found echo in your paper and in your perspective.
Oh, I love the way you shared that. And as you talked about it, I can hear the different resonances with the ways that I've been researching and really experiencing leadership and learning, and just thinking through the ways. I've been an educator for over 30 years now, and thinking about the ways about, I guess, how I've really thought about what does it mean to be an educator, what does it mean to be a leader, how do we come together to sort of lift one another up, to share who we are. And sometimes you don't know who you are until you see yourself reflected in somebody else, or somebody else reflects back to you what they have understood about who they are, and then that helps you to further deepen your understanding of the contributions that you want to make in the worlds that we inhabit together. So I love this idea of the echo, the back and forth, and that there's always a remnant with a growth, and that you don't know what is going to happen after, and that you have to be open to the possibility of change, and to see where the echo will then land and resonate with someone else, be taken up in their context, and then you get it back in some way in the future. I think it's a beautiful metaphor to think about this idea of leadership and learning.
Yeah, and I think it is very, it is a metaphor, exactly. And I think it really can give you the picture of a process. So you don't pretend to reach a goal, to obtain something. You just trust what you are doing, in what you are involved. And this is very close to my idea of flourishing. So I don't have specific training about leadership, but I remember when I read your paper, there was really a connection with my idea of flourishing. So I think it is about transformation, but again, it is not an individualistic point of view. So sometimes when we think about leadership and when we think about flourishing, we also try to make an association with an individual process of growing, of developing, of gaining knowledge. But I think it is more than that. It is more open to a collective view, a community view, and that is why I really like to create a relationship between human flourishing and narratives, because my PhD is about self-narratives related to human flourishing, but self-narratives are often seen as a personal tool about the inner self, about individual stories of life. But it is more than that. And it is more a tool, a medium for reconciliation, because if we learn to take care of our stories, we will learn also to take care of the other stories. It will be a very spontaneous and natural process. And I would say, but I don't know, probably you can tell more about this, but leadership is kind of similar to this idea, because leadership is not just about the leader, it's not just about one person, it is about the resonance of one to the community and the resonance that a person can have to anyone. So I think it is about connections. Yeah.
I love that. And again, this idea of resonances and the ways that we've kind of found each other through some of the common threads in our work. And the piece around stories and leadership, I think, has been really important in understanding what does it mean to create conditions for others to start to notice their stories and to bring the stories to life in a way that helps them build on them for what they want most to grow. But also in that idea of letting go of what is not working well for me, what's not working well for us. Are there ruptures in the system that we need to mend? Are there obstacles or challenges in the system that we need, and I like the word that you use around reconciling. And how do we create conditions as leaders? And for me, I've always been interested in this idea of leadership from within and from where you are. There's always leadership kind of associated with a formal title, but most of my research has always been about locating the leadership within the group, and where does it emerge? It changes over time. When do you feel called to leadership? And some of that has been Margaret Wheatley's work that I shared with you around how do we sort of create those collective conditions for people to feel called to move and change and grow over time together, and to create a wider path. And so as you're talking about that notion of collective, for me, when I think of leadership, I see a really wide path that goes people all across the depth. And also, as you were saying, connecting to the place where we are. And I think that's part of what we're starting to really understand is how do we have a less human-centric focus while also recognizing that the human will probably be the change agent for much of the conversations that we're having. So this idea of flourishing in schools is so interesting, connecting it to your idea of narratives. And I'd love to hear more. We talked about purpose and passion and play as three values that we can tap into to try to, I'll use the words again, notice and nurture our strengths and our gifts and offer those. So I'm curious to know, as you've been working with participants, what have their narratives told you about flourishing, and how might you connect it to some of the things we're talking about?
Thank you for sharing with me this perspective, because I think you've told me about considering the system, considering the ecosystem of education. And sometimes when we work with some concept that could be leadership or flourishing or whatever, we start from the definition. But I would say sometimes the priority is to start from the reason why we are inquiring that concept. And I remember when I first started my PhD, so 3 years ago almost, and I had the focus still on well-being and autobiography because of my master's degree in primary education, because of my background. But I needed to know the reason why I was looking for continuing this research in terms of well-being and human flourishing. And the same year happened that the representative of students from my university just took a speech, like a public declaration in front of the academy, and they brought a strong emotional issue about their well-being and their condition within the university. And they told they were feeling detached from the community. They were feeling kind of repressed and silenced by the system. So they were trying to make a manifesto, and they were trying to be heard by someone. So I decided that this was the reason why I should keep working on human flourishing. I should take care of their voices and their narratives, especially considering the fact that they are now like students who are sometimes defined like the strawberry generation from some authors, and they are defined like very fresh and creative students with a lot of like energies about changing and about transformation. But sometimes they really feel they are fragile and oppressed by a very competitive and performative system. So to me, the starting point was to listen to their narratives, to be aware of their voices and their perspectives. And during my path and during these years of PhD and like didactics commitments, I really tried to start from their definition of human flourishing, to start from their definition of well-being. And I really get that they just have the need to talk about their stories, but not because they want to have like to continue in this paradigm of individualism, of performativity, just because they really feel their story can be connected with the other's story. They feel their narrative can be the distance between me and you, for example, but at the same time like the reach point, so the point in which we can find something in common or something to start our conversation. So that is why, to me, self-narratives are really well connected to human flourishing. And I would say also that probably is kind of something in common with your field. There is this idea in the capability approach from Martha Nussbaum about narrative imagination. So if we are able to imagine in a narrative way, it means that we have empathy, that we can create empathy to understand one's story, and it means that we can create some democratic educational situations. So starting from understanding the other story, it will be easier for us to imagine and then to design some ideal educational scenarios for everyone. So narratives can be really our resource to have kind of hope for ideal and future scenarios that can start from the present. And I really like this because I really find during like this research with the students that they feel this, and I think this is important. We need to, as researchers, as educators, as like professionals in the field of education, we need to start from their perspective. And then, of course, we can add our interpretations. Everyone has his own interpretation, his own like theoretical background, but we need to start from the context. And I would say you are doing the same when you do your research and when you try to think about your idea of leadership. Mm-hmm. I think you start from the context, you start from the necessities of the context, and sometimes also you start from a positive mm-hmm. perspective. So what it is working, not just what is the problem, but what is working. So this shift is interesting to me.
Again, hearing so many resonances. So when doing the research with teacher well-being, mm-hmm. wanting to start from their stories and understanding what is well-being in your context at this time with these students and their families, within all of the complexities that is a teaching life. How do you describe well-being, and how can we bring your stories to really to the forefront, to have, and you were saying this notion of imagination, to have others be able to imagine their way into well-being. And it's often through stories that we can imagine ourselves. And so I think that is one of the powers of stories, in sharing the story and sharing the narrative. We used an appreciative inquiry approach to look at how can we notice what is working well to build more of what we want, and also from this idea that change happens from the question that is asked. At the start of the question is the start of the change. And also, and I read this somewhere and I can't remember who said it, but change happens at the speed of imagination. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the other piece, being able to imagine our way forward into something that we haven't yet seen takes a lot of trust. And so that's also part of leadership, is being able to create the conditions for trust, that people are willing to move forward with you into their imagination spaces that they're going to create. The other piece that you talked about that I think was really interesting was this notion of paying attention to the stories as a way of encouraging and empowering those who may not feel that their opportunity for change is happening. And so being able to give, and I know that's what I've tried to do with the writing, is not to give prescriptions, like a how to do well-being, but how do you provide stories in a way that is an offering for others to then consider, how might I move forward? And it sounds like that's what your work has been, or is going to be, for the students that you've been trying to represent through their narratives.
Yeah, exactly. I think in this sense, narrative can really help to open up the windows on voices that sometimes are feeling a little bit like silenced, as I told you before. And it is thanks to the idea that when you narrate about yourself, you are making a choice. So it is not something prefixed. It is something that you choose to do, and you can also choose not to do. So it is about freedom, and it is about democracy, because everyone is able to tell his or her story or their story, and at the same time we are all part of the same human story, the human development. So I think it is very interesting to notice that when we talk about our story, we are also talking about the story that we have heard during our life. So we are the product also of the stories that we have heard, that we have interacted with. And I'm trying to do that with the students. I'm trying to make them in the condition of choose if they want to narrate about their opportunities of flourishing within the university. If they want to focus more on the aspirations about flourishing, so they can choose also like the temporal dimension. They want to be more focused on the present, on the future. They want to be more engaged with the past, just to see what they have experienced. So again, it is about freedom, and it is about what you said before, and I really, really appreciate it. It is about also questioning. So the students are, thanks to also some like dialogues that we have about appreciation and about flourishing connected to appreciation, they are trying to make some narratives about from different points of view. So they are trying to make narratives about themselves as individual, then they are trying to make it in pairs, then they are trying to make them in groups. So we are trying to facing different levels of narration from the single point of view to the community point of view. So it is something like, it is not something specific, it is gradual, progressive, and based on their and their choice, of course.
So if we take back up the conversation that we were having around narrative and democracy and an opportunity through choice, and I think that was also part of what I was hoping with my research, was to shine a light on the agency that we have for well-being within systems that aren't looking out for us, and how do we make those choices. First, I think we have to see the opportunity for choosing, and then we also have to see, when we choose, what happens as a result. So how do we track it and document it so that we can then continue to choose in ways that helps promote well-being for us and collectively? And thinking as well about, and this is maybe one of the areas that I'm really curious about in leadership going forward, is how can we start to, and I think maybe this is what leadership is, that ability to see the system for how it is with imagination for how it might be.
I really like this idea because I think we can be really attentive on the context, and at the same time we use wonder as the main aim. So wonder in terms of questioning, in terms of knowing the resources, the opportunities that live in that moment, in that context. But at the same time, wonder as an idea of marveling, so of being curious and be surprised about the possibilities of change in that context. And I think in this sense, it is very helpful to have the appreciative inquiry lens. So starting from discovering what it is present in a context, to then move on dreaming, and then move on designing, and then move on delivering. So it is something that is made by collective commitment, and it is something that probably can change during the time. Like the commitment can be different depending on the people we are engaging, and it is also a question of facing some contradictions that may live in a situation. And for example, I find very interesting that nowadays well-being is a very common term in a lot of fields, especially in the educational one, and it has become very visible during recent years. But sometimes it is a definition, like a prefix definition, and it is considered as a goal, for example, based on standards or based on metrics and so on. And sometimes we forget that it is about knowing how people live, how people feel they are living well, they are relating well within the system. So I think it would be interesting to focus more on taking care of the meaning of well-being, to be aware of the definitions that we are using, because from the definition we are also expliciting some visions about the humans, some visions about human development. So if we really want to take care of well-being, we need also to face these contradictions and to not be passive in it. So probably it is also about the idea of resilience, to be active in the process, to trust the process. And I remember you suggested me to read the concept of hope, but in the critical way, so critical hope. And I think it is very, very related to what we are saying now, because critical hope, it's not about just optimism. It is about trying to imagine something better for me, something better for other people, and to be critical about them, ourselves and the world. And I think in my personal research, and I think in researches about human flourishing, we need to be aware of this. We need to know that there can be some contradictions and some different points of view, and this thing won't stop us to see if there are some shared roots about this. And of course, human flourishing and well-being, like the concepts related to humans, are different depending on the context. Of course, the fact that I'm living in a different country and I'm doing research in a different country can really influence and affect my research. But at the same time, we can find our roots, we can find some shared roots together by also sharing these kind of echoes, sharing these kind of ideas, and see if something can resonate together and then sing together. And I would say that, another important thing to know when you are doing research in terms of engaging and involving other people is accept the fact that your perspective can change over time and can be formed over time by meetings and by new discoveries. So be always like open to considering new points of view, as we are doing now. Yeah.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. And I'm thinking about that idea of hope, and that was one of the 3 flourishing values that we noticed after talking with teachers, with staff, with administrators, was piecing together all the different ways that educators spoke to us about what it means to flourish, and that idea of compassion, trust, and hope being so important for buoying up a system, whether it's individuals having hope that they can be part of continuing to make a difference, a positive difference in their students' lives, in their family lives, and also that notion of sort of critical hope around recognizing the suffering, the injustice, the challenges that are ever present in a system that is human-made, and that how can we as humans think through better ways of approaching that require reconciliation, that require reflecting and consideration on who have we been and how will we continue to live well together going forward. So I appreciate that sort of remembering of the importance of hope as part of what it means to lead for flourishing. The other piece that you brought up is the idea of context, and this is kind of what has been leading me in my latest research around whole school well-being, and to look at how do we start to notice well-being from within a school context, and how the people who make up the school and who dream their visions into reality, how, if we pay attention to what that means, does that offer new stories for thinking about well-being that goes beyond what you were saying around prescriptions or one way of doing something. So it's been really exciting to work with another colleague and look at what does well-being look like from within different contexts? What can we learn across the context that, as you were saying, might be common to all of us, but what particularities are important to pay attention to, and how do we support those in a system? And what is a leader and or leaders, what kinds of visioning will they need to be able to ensure that it can be sustained? And the important piece that I think you mentioned, allow it to change over time as change happens and needs to happen. So I think you're bringing up again these interesting echoes across both of our work.
Yeah, exactly. I had a specific experience that is very related to what you're saying. And I remember 2 years ago, a professor of mine just called me and just invited me to write a story, like a biography of a woman, but I didn't know this woman, and I didn't feel I could do that, because in that moment I felt it was too much, because I didn't have any awareness of which was the story of this woman. And when I first met this woman, we looked at each other and we were very different, like We were grown in different contexts. We had different ages and different points of view about life. But one shared point was our curiosity. So the idea of accepting the fact that we can learn something from another person, even if it's different, even if we feel it's different. And I met this woman very frequently for 1 year, like twice a month. And we really created a connection. We really created what I now say it's a friendship. And the fact is that she really trusted me. She really gave me the possibility to build compassion about her story. And we shared a lot of conversations about our life, about also the idea of hope. And she's a woman who really has spent all her life just trying to face some struggling, and she was an educator during times where women were not accepted as, for example, teachers in science and math and in scientific disciplines, And she's a mother of 2 children in a condition of disability, and during those times, it was like the 70s, there was this common idea of autism as a consequence of cold motherhood. So she really struggled a lot, but at the same time, she always tells me that she never let her hope go away. And it doesn't mean that she didn't feel hurt sometimes, that she didn't lose some trust about life and about things, but at the same time, she just tried to be able to imagine new possible situations for herself, better for herself and her children and her students. And actually, she has been also a leader in educational center, and she always speaks about this idea of leadership as something very deep that you can really understand in the way the leader creates dynamics with the system, with the other people. And I was always very curious about that. So that is probably why I'm trying also to understand your perspective about leadership, because I would like to know more about the idea of a leader but related to the system. So in my mind, sometimes I had this idea of leader as someone who is acting for the best of a system, but who is not very related to the system. So there is kind of like, distance. So based on what you were saying and what I have read about you, I would say it's kind of a different perspective, and I would like to know more about that.
Thanks for the story and that question around sort of thinking through leadership. And I think over time, I'm coming to understand leadership, and I touched on it briefly, as the ability to see a system. And that takes patience, it takes time, it also takes compassion. And part of the appreciative lens that I think is really helpful is, and part of this comes from Ellen Langer's work on mindfulness versus autopilot, and the idea to be able to really train yourself to be able to see switch off autopilot, which means we're just walking into systems and seeing them as they always have been, but not open to the possibility that there's newness, that there are surprises, that there might be delight or beauty in a system, and that by focusing on these various differences and diversities, that we turn ourselves into a mindful awareness that lets us see things differently, and from seeing the different perspectives are likely opportunities for shifting, opportunities for appreciating others in different ways, opportunity for maybe letting go of what hasn't been working, but seeing it in a different way. And so I'm wondering about, and some of this comes from Otto Scharmer's work, his work on Theory U and presencing, which I know has kind of been taken up again recently with the human flourishing piece, whether it's the OECD or also the Harvard project, is this idea of recognizing that the system is part of us, but it's also changeable. And it's changeable because it is an object of interest, and that through looking at it in different ways, the looking creates the change. It's almost like that appreciative inquiry around the question. And so opening and looking together from a deeper place of awareness, not from a transactional utilitarian approach, but from that sense of collectively together we have the gifts, we have the talents, we have the opportunities, if we get curious about who we are and what we offer, and the ways that collectively we might have that imagination to spur something on, that we could come to a different side of what, Otto Scharmer would talk about the you, and into sort of crystallizing and up into different opportunities. It requires imagination. Yeah. I think the word you used around awe, I think, and wonder. And so that's sort of been part of my work, is to try to understand how do we work with leaders in ways that helps them to tap into some of these places within us that allow us to move into these spaces of wonderment, of curiosity, of recognizing beauty and seeing excellence as something that goes beyond that competitive nature of besting one another, to looking at how do we start to tap into some of those. And that's certainly been part of the positive organizational work that I've done over the years, but looking also at this idea of meaning and seeking meaning. And I've been really thinking sort of recently and listening to some work on spirituality and consciousness, and where spirituality may be located in our brain. And I've been listening to Lisa Miller's book on the awakened brain, and she talks about consciousness as a greater consciousness, that we can't see the location of it, but that doesn't mean that it's not all around us. Okay. And so just looking at the ways that we can maybe start to think about leadership more broadly, beyond the tasks and the focuses of getting things done, to, I think, what you're sharing around this idea of paying attention to the echoes and noticing them and seeing them. Yeah,
and the meaning of going beyond is beautiful. I find it beautiful. Especially in educational context, sometimes we have some, what I would say, and authors, for example, Volstad, say about educational context as frozen context. So sometimes there is this idea of a context that is seen just for a characteristic. So, for example, university, the context where I'm researching, of course it is a formal and academic context, but it can be also something else, and we just need to see that to make it visible. So, for example, it is not just about gaining knowledge and being the best in some field, but it is also a primary context of identity development. So a lot of students from my research now, they are telling me that within the university they really get closer to some questions about belonging, about identity, about well-being. So of course we need to pay attention to the primary education as the lifetime where people are growing, but we need to not forget that older context that has a specific and official and institutional meaning can also have and additional meanings, that it doesn't mean they are secondary, but they are something we are not used to see. So we probably need to create a new habit to have more possibilities of seeing, a kind of pedagogical side about that. And I think this idea really influenced me over this time, over the time I was studying in the university, and now the time I'm doing research. And I would say it is also one of the reasons why I'm really trying to get into the idea of self-narratives again. Because, self-narrative is something that we use a lot. So it is our primitive and natural way of communicating and expressing. But it can be something more, it can be something deeper, it can really reveal something we weren't aware of or something we weren't considering a lot. In your research, you tried also to use narratives and stories as the main tool to approach and to interact with leaders and with different people from the community. And probably these people using their stories just recognize new things. So I think this is amazing. I mean, we are always talking about stories, but if we just stop for a minute and we realize the meaning of our story, we can know something more about ourselves and about other people.
Thinking about what you were sharing around the power of story has always been very important, and the power of story for being able to see ourselves differently and to recognize that what we need to change is probably within us if we see it in different ways. So sometimes story can open the space for that. Thinking maybe about the question that framed the work that I was doing with teachers and educators, and the question that we were using was, what if our work is to learn how to flourish? And that was the question that we asked to teachers, leaders. What if your work is to learn how to flourish? How does that change either the way you see yourself, or how does that bring to life some of the pieces of who you want to be in your work? So I guess as we think about wrapping up our conversation today, I wondered if there's something inspiring you, whether it's book or music or art.
Yeah, I would say something inspiring to me. I mean, a lot of things, but they are all related to the artistic world. So the expressive world, I would say, especially music and poems, because they are important channels of expression. And I would say they are really related to the meaning of echoes I was telling you. So, for example, a song can be an echo for a lot of people. So a song is something the author and the songwriter and the singer made a meaning in it. But at the same time, we can interpret the song as we want, as we are feeling in that moment. And it's same with the story. We can put on it a lot of meanings, but we can change it over times, and depending on how we are and where we are and when we are, in which time of our life. So I would say that. But I would say also poems, because they are short narratives about feelings, about life, about daily life. And it is they are about the tentative of create a spot for ourselves to reflect upon things in a kind of defined space, but it doesn't mean it is strict. It is a strict space. It is very flexible, but it is just a space that we take for us to take care of what we are feeling about life, about things. So I would say these two channels are really inspiring for me, and they are really related to the way I'm trying to inquire human flourishing.
Oh, that's beautiful. I would agree. And the other piece that I find inspiring is other people's words and stories and quotes. And I'm just so pleased that you decided to take the chance to come and spend your time here and to share your gifts and experiences with us here. And I'm thinking of a quote, and it's interesting because I've been thinking lately about synchronicity, and I was talking about sort of that idea of spirituality and synchronicity. And this quote is one that has been really interesting for me, and I've told my kids the quote, and I try to live it myself, and it's part of what has also kind of influenced the ways I think about research and how I want research to be useful in a very encouraging, uplifting, informative, useful, of course, but hopefully empowering way. And as I was thinking about the quote that I wanted to share today, as I'm listening to the book yesterday on my walk with Lisa Miller, she's talking about this person in the book. And it's a person that is from very many years ago. So I just think, again, that idea of synchronicity. So it's a quote by Howard Thurman. And she was talking about someone in her study and the connections to Howard Thurman. And I just thought that was so synchronous. So I'll share the quote, and it's one of my favorites. And the quote is, "Don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive and go do it. Because what the world needs is more people who have come alive."
Wow.
And I think you are someone who resonates the idea of aliveness and looking for how you come most alive.
I would say thank you again, because you told me you were lucky to have me here, but I would say I am lucky to be here. And I just want to say that a conversation really works when you have a lot of questions. And I have a question that probably will be like open to you and to everyone. And it is about like flourishing. So it is about what we have in common in our research and in our life. But it is also connected to our idea of going beyond and hope and compassion. And I would ask myself, but also other people, which kind of relationships like this, which kind of systems would we imagine and wonder in order to work and inquire human flourishing, not as an outcome, but as a shared responsibility, as a shared commitment. So this is my question, and I will try to think about it in the next few months and years.
I'm also going to think about it, and thank you for sharing your echoes.
Thank you very much.
So we'll leave you with a question, not an answer. What does flourishing mean to you right now in your own context? Thank you for being with us. May this conversation spark your own reflections on what it means to learn, live, and of course, lead well.